Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. In the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of a living nature, of which we're an integral part, with deep gratitude to all of our ancestors that have brought us to the present moment in the human journey. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene the 6th of 10 sessions on the power of nonviolence. It's a theme that challenges human beings everywhere, and not only today, but over history. Our tendency toward violence is endemic, and as well, this aspirational vision that we all have for living harmoniously with each other and with the larger ecosystem. And it's in that spirit, I just want to note for everybody's edification today that today is the feast day of St. Francis. It was about 1,000 years ago that Francis of Assisi lived and taught and aspired to another way of being a Christian in those medieval times. And the breakthrough that St. Francis brought to the world was nonviolence. He communed with the trees, he communed with the birds, he communed with animals everywhere, and he exuded such a radiance of peace that it was said that the animals would come and just sit close by as he was meditating in the forests and in the isolated places where he loved to go, just simply to be with nature. It's also worth noting about St. Francis that it was St. Francis that came up with what we consider now the traditional Christmas scenery of a manger and straw and hay and donkeys. And up to that time, for 1,000 years, as Christianity was developing, Christ was seen as the Pantocrator, the great judge of the world. And it was St. Francis that humanized Jesus and brought Jesus down into human form and actually built the first manger in one of the little buildings that he rehabilitated into a little church. One of the first things he did was build a manger. And that humanization of Jesus, that tender, loving care for the animals, that deep resonance and reverence for nature was embodied by this great man. And out of that life came an impulse, not only that helped to reshape Christianity, but has reverberated around the world. So as we contemplate some of the issues that St. Francis contemplated 1,000 years ago, it's worth bearing in mind that he still lives with us, and the spirit of nonviolence that he embodied continues to inspire. So happy feast day for St. Francis, everyone. And as we contemplate these matters, let us also remember that the revolution is moving forward in Iran. We have been, over the past several weeks now, commemorating the death of Mahsa Amini, who was beaten to death by the morality police there in Tehran for not having her hijab on exactly right. You can imagine that. And it's become a George Floyd moment where people have been protesting worldwide in a growing crescendo of both protest and aspiration for change in that country that has been ruled for 44 years by obscene, criminal tyrants. And so we have St. Francis and the beauty of his vision of the world and humanity, And we have the contradiction of the Ayatollahs in Iran and the sacrifice of a young woman's life. And let us hold those as an antinomial polarity in our psyches as we take just a minute or two to breathe together. And as we breathe together, let us send love to the young women in Iran that are leading that revolutionary movement. And let us remember St. Francis and inspire ourselves for what we can do in the world today to bring nonviolence. Georg?
Yes, it looked like everybody was gone for a second here. We're going to make the meditation now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No worries. Thank you, everyone. You know, as I was looking at the graphic, as I was breathing, which is the graphic, a depiction of the composite of the orbital pathway of the Earth and Venus as they circumambulate the sun. It creates a 5-pointed star. And our breathing is to 5.5 seconds in and 5.5 seconds out. And I was just reminded as we begin that today the Nobel Prize in Physics was given to physicists in France, United States, and Austria for their work on entanglement, this great mystery of contemporary physics that a particle in one part of the world or another part of the solar system, if you modify it, it will have the same modification to other particles that have been previously related to it. And this is what Einstein couldn't accept. And he called it spooky action at a distance, but it is basically the physics of the entanglement, the physics that everything in the universe is interrelated and co-originates, as the Buddha said 2,500 years ago, all of cosmic being. So it's just interesting on the day of St. Francis, who understood that he was one with nature, that the Nobel Prize for Physics is being awarded for those physicists who are beginning the process of breaking down the current paradigm of science, that it's a reductionist, disconnected, materialist world that is now breaking down in the face of hard scientific evidence that we are one with all of it, all the time. And that, as Plotinus said, all of us, the whole universe, breathes together. It's my pleasure now to introduce our trailer that we've been showing each day, The Third Harmony, which is a film of which Tom Eddington, who is the convener of this 10-day program on nonviolence with Michael Nagler, has put together. So I want to thank you, Tom, and thank you, Michael, for everything that you've done. And they will convene the program after we watch this short 2-minute trailer of the documentary, The Third Harmony. Thank you, everyone.
It seems like every one of us has this big library of humanity and nonviolence inside them.
One thing we have in common as individuals, as human beings, is the power to show love. The basis of nonviolence is love.
Governments have spent billions and billions of dollars getting violent science right in the past 400 years. And I think that it's time that we invest some time and energy into alternatives.
Our evolutionary mandate is to move into the peaceful cooperation, because we see now that we're destroying our own infrastructure, we're destroying the planet we depend on.
If you start from the assumption that everybody has a good core in their nature, that we're all deeply interconnected, that there is no problem which cannot be resolved to the benefit of all parties. If you start with those assumptions, and even if you don't believe them, you take them on as a hypothesis, as assumptions, and you test them, and you find out that it works.
We have to think big. Sojourner Truth didn't think small, Martin Luther King didn't, Gandhi didn't. They had big, bold ideas.
Seeing it firsthand, seeing the power of nonviolence, and feeling we really have the power to make history, to change history.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for the opening remarks, the beautiful reminder of St. Francis, and so much of what's happening in the world. As Michael shared with us yesterday, particularly the women in Iran, please know that you're not alone. To the people in the Ukraine, please know that you're not alone. To the people all over the world who are suffering from violence, from conflict, please know that you're not alone. And it's important that message be heard over and over and over again, that the nonviolent actions that are being taken are being taken for all of the right reasons, and that you're not alone. The world is watching. I'd like to welcome Michael Nagler, my dear friend and writer and co-director with the group of us who produced The Third Harmony. Michael is a professor of classics and comparative literature emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley, and teaches in a peace and nonviolent conflict studies program he founded on the campus in the 1970s. In addition to teaching at Berkeley, Michael speaks frequently for media and the general public on issues of peace and nonviolence, and does presentations around the world for the Blue Mountain Center of Meditation. Michael's written 6 books and contributes articles frequently to Tikkun and Yes Magazine and other progressive journals. He's consulted for the U.S. Institute of Peace and many organizations and projects dealing with nonviolence and world peace. Michael is the founder and president of the Metta Center. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much, Tom. Welcome to everyone. I wanted to say to Jim in particular that there was somebody in my room who was very pleased with your introduction. Yeah, this has been, and I'm sure will continue to be, a wonderful series. And the contrast is something that we feel in our hearts and minds and in our bodies, the contrast between what we're doing here and what we're remembering that has been done here in history and what will be done more and more in the future, and contrasting that with what is happening in Tehran and in many, many places all around the world. So welcome, everyone. I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of my good friends again this morning.
Well, let me go ahead and introduce the rest of our panel. Joining us today from Amherst, Massachusetts, Dr. Stellan Vithajan. He's a professor of sociology, a scholar, activist, and the endowed chair in the study of nonviolent direct action and civil resistance at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. He's the director of the Resistance Studies Initiative at Amherst and researcher of the Department of Sociology at the University of Gothenburg. Welcome, Stellan.
Thank you.
Also joining us this morning is Pietro Miglio. He's a professor and historian in the University in Mexico, and has done a tremendous amount of work, particularly working with those who have been disappeared in Mexico and working in peace and nonviolence in the country. And finally, Tom Hastings. Tom is an associate professor of conflict resolution at Portland State University, coordinator of the Bachelor of Arts and Sciences degree and certification programs. He's director of Peace Voice, a co-founder of the Portland Peace Team, author of several books focusing on nonviolence and more than 500 other publications. He's a board member of the International Peace Research Association Foundation, on the Academic Advisory Council of the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict, founding faculty with the James Lawson Institute, and he's a former Catholic worker and a 2-time Plowshares resistor. Welcome to you all. Pietro, why don't you start us off today and share the work you've been doing in Mexico for many years?
Well, thank you very much, Tom, Michael, and all the other friends. I'm very happy, motivated to be here in my Spanglish. Sorry for these little things, but I'll try. I speak 2-3 times in the year English if it goes well, so it's good and challenging for me. And starting with St. Francis, with that meditation and with the third harmony, that it's a film we've been passing in some cultural centers in Mexico many times, and it's very useful and deep. Is a good way for introducing what we are going to share. We have not so much time, so I will try to go direct to what we'll share. And what I'm going to speak is things of life, not things of books or newspapers, are direct experiences from many years with young people, collectives, and other groups that we continuously try to build and encourage and learn from them. Many people see me as a university teacher in National University in Mexico, and others see me as a social activist. This is a problem I had all my life, but it's also a richness. So we can share from both points of view, because we part from the point that reflection is an action. It's not a theoretical way of thinking in the clouds, but it's a way of acting. So for us, reflection is a very important struggle instrument. And that's what we are going to try to share, but with some humble and powerful keys in the line of what we call building knowledge, not only information. We distinguish, and it's very useful for our actions, between information and knowledge, are very different processes. So I would like to share some little keys we've been learning in a social process about one of the main inhumanity situations of our country, that it's the disappeared people. We have nowadays in the government numbers, more or less 105,000 disappeared people in 10 years. If you think in Latin America, the country that was the biggest in this subject was Argentina in the 70s, and they had 30,000 disappeared. So this situation in Mexico is a very critical and hard in this kind of war that crosses our country in different ways, and that has nothing to do with what some people call war drugs. Absolutely, it's not that. It's a criminal state that attacks in many ways civil society. And the criminal state has authorities in all the levels, has criminal gangs, has the army, the police, has businessmen, and has a part of the society that works with them. A criminal job is the first kind of job in our country from decades. So it's a very big way of living and earning money for a family. In this situation, Mexico and also Latin America has, in these last decades, some actors, social struggler actors in nonviolence, very important to learn from them. particularly in Mexico, the principal peace builders are, in one part, mothers of disappeared and murdered people in these last decades. 90% are women who do this work. And also father and mothers from the Ayotzinapa massacre, from students, peasant students that were killed 43 in a genocide action in 2014, the 26th September. They are in the front of nonviolent struggle in the country. And also there is another kind of very important strugglers in this line that are the peasants and indigenous that defend their territories, their natural resources. And they do lots of actions more in the line of civil disobedience, and families, relatives of disappeared people do more actions in the line of non-cooperation. This is a very interesting analysis that it can be done of our social struggles. An important thing is to ask ourselves how this started. I will share a big experience, but with some little concepts about what they call the brigades, the national search brigades, that are a part of a social process that started in 2010, but it had a point higher from 2016, when this is a very important thing that happened. Relatives started to be awareness, to understand that government wasn't going to search their relatives disappeared. This was a very hard situation for them because they had hope. They had the messianic idea that government tries to do the best for the citizens and is worried for their health, their lives. So they were going to do something. But after 4, 5, 6 years, we've been sharing with them also, they understood that all was a big simulation, that they said something, but they didn't do nothing. So they started to build some kind of non-cooperation actions, very important and original, that they tried to search themselves without asking permission. And I would like to make emphasis in this idea of the permission, because I think it's a very important idea in non-cooperation actions. So only with their bodies, almost with any money, and with some social, civil support of NGOs, groups, collectives, they started to go into very big fields where there could be their relatives, and started to dig themselves. That's a very, very important action that has also to do with a Zapatista's idea that in 2003, when they started their autonomy political process, one of their chiefs, David, said, "We want autonomy without asking permission." And they started to build their own territories with their own chiefs, and they have in many parts of Chiapas what we call a parallel power. They have two governments, the official and the Zapatistas, and people of the communities go much more with the Zapatista government than to the official government. That's a very important action that they taught the country that we can't be waiting to the sky, looking the sky, that the government does something that will never do. This awareness of the relatives has been very hard, because it's important, as a second point, to understand how these relatives had in a few years to pass from being housewives, from selling food for pets, from doing every kind of jobs, of services, completely non-political reflection. They had become very hard social strugglers and human rights defenders. This is a very, very original and interesting process that crossed their lives for the humanity of having a close relative disappeared. And it's incredible how they changed their social identity, and now they are the persons that do research, that know much more how to do this work and how to confront war in Mexico in the part of disappearance. They have been organizing a very big number of nonviolent actions, some of them very originals, I think, reflecting from their experience that they didn't have never before, only in these 4 or 5 last years. Another point that it's important is the action in groups. That's something they have understood with their bodies and their practice. The authorities don't listen to you if you don't go in an organization, in a group. If you go alone, they will make you a lot of stories, but they won't do nothing because they don't feel political pressure. I don't know if this is the word, but political pressure. Okay, so for them, for these relatives, their collectives, there are hundreds of collectives all over the country. Some of 3, 4, 5 families, and others of 100 families. And for them, the collective is a family. It's more than a community. It's very, very important, this point, because they feel and they have a transformation in their moral identity that in many cases, if they find the bones or the alive, their relative, they continue in the collective, because for them, the son or daughter or sister or brother of another woman that walks with them is exactly as it was the own son or daughter. Yes, so this is an important moral change they have been having, because also they speak a lot to civil society, saying every time that we are here not only for asking you to help us to find our dear relative, but to say you that you must do this, and this for making that this doesn't happen to you in future. That's a very, very important moral key they have, because it's not only asking help for me, but I want to help you that you still don't understand what's its problem because you didn't suffer it. But in our country, the probabilities of suffering are very high in disappearance. No, so in this sense, I will try to go a little short because I know that the time, but I want to say this little thing, that the brigades, the national brigades, that not only are national, but are also local and state brigades, have 6 areas. One, the first is the area of searching clandestine graves. That's, well, the number 1 is this, searching our relatives alive. That's the first area, the most important, but unfortunately, it's not the most successful. They go to hospitals, to jails, to psychiatric hospitals, to places where drug people go to recover. They go everywhere to search alive their relatives. They also go to the field to search clandestine graves. They also go, the third area is to forensic places to search dead people and identify. It's a very, very hard work. Also, they have a work in the social fabric, no? in the society, and they go to schools, to churches, and they speak in squares to authorities and civil society. They share their stories and try to touch their hearts to change, most of them to the polices. It's very deep to listen them speaking to polices. Polices, women and men in the squares. It's very hard because they speak, as Gandhi said, direct to authority and to their hearts to make a break. It's not easy, a rupture. In this sense, I want to share an action, a campaign we had for closing that we built from 3 years ago, and it has been important for the relatives that we named with the Jesus sentence, the way, the truth, and the life. The way, the truth, in the life is a sentence of Jesus in St. John, no Gospel. The way, because we ask people of civil society to tell us the way, the place where there can be a clandestine grave. The truth, because we want civil society to tell us something of what happened. And the life, because it's important to understand that a relative that has a disappeared people stops living. Your life, it's even survival, it's less than that. You go to a square, the telephone rings, and you never know if it's not going to be a notice of your relative. So you live in hell, really. So having a little truth returns you a part of your life, of your normal life. But this campaign, it's interesting because it has been done more in churches and in schools. The relatives made with their hands many peace mail boxes with some art, decoration, words, nice paper, and very important, anonymous information is what they search. So they put these boxes in the churches and schools and other places, and they ask people in an anonymous way to put inside papers where they could know there could be a clandestine grave. People also write in these anonymous papers letters or words to encourage and be solidarian with the relatives. Write love words, no, to make them feel that are not alone. But the main important thing, and that has been successful, is that people in Mexico and everywhere know many things in their communities that happen. People know everything in the little communities, but they don't speak because they are terrorized and they would be killed immediately, and their families. So these kind of anonymous papers try to push you to say something of the truth you know, and you to be protected, because nobody knows who says this. And an important thing for closing this little speech is that they say this sentence: we seek treasures, we don't seek guilties. So their process of reflection tries to put the point in finding the treasures that disappeared, that are their loved family. But they are not in this moment trying to find guilty people to put in jail, because in this way many people won't speak. So the first thing they need is to know where are the bodies or bones of their beloved people. Now, this is a very important key in the sense of nonviolent justice also to reflect. Well, if you want, I leave it here and we can continue sharing. I don't know if I passed the time, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Pietro. So wonderful to be with you today. Thank you for joining us and sharing what's been going on in Mexico, and unfortunately for many other countries around the world. And so appreciate your bringing light to a very dark subject. Stellan, I'd like to invite you in to share.
All right, thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, Pietro. Yeah, so in my work as an activist over many years and as a scholar the last years, I've been very inspired by Gandhi, and one of the things that I found particularly interesting with him is the combination of resistance and the attempt to construct a new society during the struggle. And in my work at University of Massachusetts in Amherst, I've had the possibility to travel around quite a bit, and I've been visiting indigenous people. And it became clear to me that among indigenous people, there is this combination of resistance and the building up of a new society, or the continuation, revitalization of the old traditional society that is going on all the time. So what I would like to do is to just briefly build on what is my ongoing work, which is a book on constructive resistance, which is trying to kind of highlight this combination of resisting systemic violence while you are trying to create a new society. And then I'll give an example of this, and it comes also then from Latin America. It comes from Brazil, the landless workers, which is then a non-indigenous example of how this is done. So let me share the screen here. I hope this works now. Do you see my screen?
Yes, very good.
Okay, great. So I'm working with the concept of constructive resistance in order to highlight the idea of constructive program, as Gandhi talked about, as combined with resistance. I'm particularly intrigued when the two aspects are combined. I think any kind of movement that is, for me, a hopeful sign of nonviolence is a movement that is trying to combine it somehow. And it could be used in the terms of Naomi Klein, that talks about that the climate struggle needs to not just say no to the climate crisis, but also saying yes by presenting alternatives of how to live differently. So basically, when we understand resistance, be that nonviolent resistance or armed resistance, it's very often seen as something where you only try to protest, hinder, or non-cooperate against systems of oppression or violence. But for those of you that are working within academia, it might be clear that for a lot of authors, when it comes to power, have highlighted how power is not just forbidding and punishing, but it's actually productive. Power is something that forms our subjectivity, institutions, ways of life, and that's perhaps the most powerful form of power. So then the question is, couldn't then resistance also be productive in the way that resistance is building up new ways of living, new subjectivities, new ways of institutions? And I think that the civil resistance studies that we see in academia is very state-oriented. It's very focused on protesting the state or creating revolutions where that you can create regime change. But there are examples that are much, I think, radical and interesting, that is going beyond the state. And that's what I mean, that I have found among a lot of indigenous people. And I think the Zapatistas that Pietro mentioned are examples of that, of creating autonomy within the state, not striving to become a new nation state, but creating autonomy for their villages. But we find it among many different groups, where the emphasis is on self-rule and autonomy rather than influencing the state. Because these groups are people that not only are disappointed on a state that doesn't help them, but they are also seeing that the state is part of the problem. The state is part of the systemic violence against them. So we find it among urban slum dwellers, like in the Abalali in Durban. We find it among the Kurds in Rojava and in the Turkish regions of Kurdistan. And we find them then among MST, the landless workers in Brazil, that I want to mention a little bit about in this short intervention. But I think this connects very well to Gandhi's emphasis on the constructive program, something that was not really understood in the anti-colonial movement. It was very few. There were some activists that were rallying around Gandhi for that, but mostly the anti-colonial movement, and many of them educated in the West, were focused on taking state power. Like Nehru and others were seeing that as the form of liberation, whereas Gandhi saw the liberation as being more a matter of creating autonomy among the villagers in India. So I think we could understand this as a form of nonviolent resistance that is very hopeful and interesting, that is combining the yes and the no, where the alternative is made into a tool of a resistance. And this is called many different things in the literature: resurgence among indigenous people, or prefigurative politics, commoning, and autonomy that is lifted up. I want to highlight that I'm not talking about separatist movements that are trying to create new nation states, but rather movements that are trying to create self-governed ways of living, economically, politically, culturally, and socially in different ways. We could call it parallel institutions that some of the literature in nonviolence is mentioning. I've done a bit of research on this, and I'm happy to share at some other point if people are interested. But it's basically centered around a book that is coming out next year. So, so the MST, the landless workers in Brazil, has since the beginning of the 80s, during the dictatorship and onwards, done a lot of land occupations. They have done the typical kind of nonviolent protest, of course, as well. But what is most important is their land occupations, because what happens is that they resist the unjust land distribution. Poor people from the favelas or people without land that are starving, they occupy land. But what is key to me is that they're not just resisting that land distribution by taking on land, but they are creating what they say is the new Brazil on this land. So they create cooperatives, they create ecological farming, they create a different kind of school that is inspired by Paulo Freire and so on. They are in many ways trying to create a different way of living on that land. So the yes is the creation of other ways of living. The no is the resistance against the private property of land that is in the hand of large landowners. So here's a map that is actually 10 years old, but it's showing some of the land occupations that they have done, which is incredibly impressive in Brazil. So they've done over 2,000 land occupations and mobilized about 5 million activists in this struggle since the 80s. And what I want to highlight here, which I think some of you will appreciate, is that if you collect all the land they have liberated in this struggle, sometimes it's taken 20 years until they get legal recognition. Many people have been killed, and it's been a long struggle. It's almost the equal size to Cuba. If you collect all the land. So it's a non-violent revolution happening, a Cuban revolution that happens from below by the MST. And the MST is not talking very much about Gandhi, they're aware of, but they don't talk about it, but they practice it in a way that I think is really interesting in combining the ideas of Gandhi. So it's a kind of a land reform from below that is very much kind of prefiguring a future society of Brazil, which is kind of interesting now when we have the elections going on in Brazil. So my point here is that they are met with a lot of repression, a lot of violence from militias, from the landlords and the police, even massacres. However, they are basically unarmed. They are not that for pacifist reasons, but they are because they know that they will be totally crushed if they would take up arms. So here is where I see a kind of a new form of, a very hopeful form of nonviolent action that is going on in the world among groups that are adopting these kind of principles connected to Gandhi, but that is maybe not talking about in the language of nonviolence or Gandhi, but are super interesting in that way. So that's a very short summary of all this, but I want to suggest that a lot of groups are doing it like this, and I think we should be open to and look to nonviolent action that is not centering the state, but is trying to create autonomy. That's maybe my main point here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Stellan. It was short, but very powerful and very impactful in that you're giving real examples of what's happening around the world. And that's important for our audience to know. Tom, can we invite you in to share today?
Sure. I appreciate what everybody's been talking about. There's so much there. What a rich discussion in some of the qualities of people who not just practice nonviolence, but actually have that as a philosophy. I think are interesting. And so, I look at somebody like Michael Nagler and I say, well, how do I tease out his some of his worst qualities. How can I make Michael Nagler jealous? Well, I wear this T-shirt and I know that he's, it's, yesterday I taught one class. I think unlike a lot of academics, I'm much more of a teaching academic than I am a research academic. So I focus on really trying to bring as many undergraduates into my world so that I can, work on their worldview with the knowledge that everybody else is producing. This is the Dahlia Fest this morning. And so I have about 100 students every term in 3 different classes. They're all undergraduates. And that's kind of a churn that I think it's basically tantamount to my activism because I am working on them. And no matter which class I'm teaching, the focus ultimately becomes on how does nonviolence relate to this topic? So yesterday was peace studies, and obviously it relates directly to that. And we looked at the A Force More Powerful episode of the Nazi occupation of Denmark. And we talked about in the context of peace studies and what they have been reading, we talked about what lessons can we take from this that, maybe it's too late for Ukraine to do something like this, but how can we begin to infuse our collective consciousness with other options? Because the 2 options that the master narrative gives society is, well, you either surrender, you capitulate, or you go to armed struggle. And so the third harmony, as it were, is kind of like it's a perennial new item, and it's working on our consciousness. That's, I think, the job of all of us in whatever, you can do it. Stellan does it by a lot of travel and a lot of networking and good research and academic writing and academic editing and publishing. And, all of us have our own path toward basically promoting nonviolence in any way that we possibly can. So at the end of the discussion yesterday, after seeing the film and hearing students' reactions and kind of trying to add information, then my suggestion was, well, is there a way to look at this so that when we think about peace studies, that nonviolent resistance becomes the new realpolitik. We are the new realists. We are the ones who say, gosh, look at the mortality figures across Europe, obviously excluding neutral countries like Sweden. And you look at the percentage of the people in those countries who perished, and Denmark was the lowest percentage. And they lived with this occupation, and it was grinding on them. But they did, the youth oftentimes would basically be their version of, sort of Antifa. I mean, blowing things up and, saying we're not targeting people, we're targeting the infrastructure and so forth. But the nonviolent resistance basically it hampered the Germans enough so that the Germans actually had a net loss in that country. It was almost like an application of sanctions. And we talked about that in class too. It's like, well, after sanctions were applied against Russia for invading Ukraine, after 1 month, then all of a sudden the master narrative was, well, see, sanctions are too slow. They don't work. But then when we think about how long it took the world to defeat the Nazis from September of 1939 to well into 1945, And if you add on, the rest of World War II, the whole struggle was between 5 and 5.5 years. They didn't say after 1 month, gee, it looks like this violence isn't working. They let it go until it was a done deal. And tens of millions of people perished. So that, I just regard that coming from every single angle as my own activism, my own mission is primarily working with undergraduate students. When I started teaching in this program, we only had a graduate program. And so you have a small cohort of students. And frankly, most of them were already into some career. They weren't the young burning idealists that come into the undergraduate world. And the young burning idealists are the ones I want. Military recruiter will say, you give me a young person for 45 to 60 minutes in a room by myself, I'm going to recruit that young person. That's exactly my philosophy in the classroom. I get them for, 11 weeks, and that's my role. And so then they go on to do whatever they're going to do. And I know that, there's a large percentage of them who they've just got a few extra talking points. They don't really do much with it. But when I find those few that I can help catch fire about nonviolence, that makes it all worthwhile to me. So, and every once in a while, I got to come out of retirement as an activist. So a couple of weeks ago, I went to a gun shop and I went there ahead of time and told the owner, I said, I'm not here to talk about your Second Amendment issues or anything else. All I'm asking is that you take the lead as a gun shop owner. And I'm looking at a wall in his gun shop full of AR-15 and AR-15 style assault rifles. And, it's the NRA a few years ago called it America's gun, was the AR-15. It's a combat weapon. It's a weapon of war. And so I said, about all the children who have been slaughtered. I'm asking you to take the lead because our judiciary won't do it. Obviously, the federal government won't do it. We can barely do anything even at the state level because of the Second Amendment and Supreme Court rulings. I'm asking you to take the lead. As a person of conscience, I know that you are as grief-stricken about these children who have been slaughtered as I am. And so I'm asking you to take the lead and be the first gun store owner to say, we won't sell these anymore. First one in our state. And, he just looked at me like I was a little loony. But then I, over the next week or so, then I went to the police in the precinct that the gun shop is in, told them what I was going to do. And, they seemed pretty relaxed about it. When I said I was a co-founder of the Portland Peace Team, they were even more relaxed. We've got a good relationship with the police in town because we do a better job. When Antifa comes out and the Proud Boys come out, we de-escalate them far better than the police do. And they know that. They respect us. We are never their agents, but we have this ongoing relationship with them. So that I try to take care of these prongs beforehand, because a tenet of nonviolence is transparency, right? And so, and then in the interim, I posted here and there, this is something I'm thinking about doing, and I chose September 22nd because I wanted to honor the 94th birthday of Reverend James Lawson, and it also fit within the Campaign for Nonviolence, going from the International Day of Nonviolence declared by the UN in 2007, September 21st, which of course was the founding of the UN, to October 2nd, which of course is the International Day that's the International Day of Nonviolence because it's Gandhi's birthday. So the International Day of Peace, International Day of Nonviolence, that's the Campaign of Nonviolence. And And so his birthday, Reverend Lawson's birthday, happens to fit right in there. So I told the gun shop owner this too, and he was, singularly unimpressed, as you might expect. But during the interim, then Peter Burgell, the founder of Oregon Peace Works, who lives in Salem, he decided to come and join. So the two of us went, and a bunch of other folks were there just to offer support. And we got there, and we were we assumed that we would be arrested. But ahead of time, I said, well, it's a Gandhian dilemma action, because if we go there and they don't arrest us, the only way that can happen is if they shoot us or beat us and throw us out the door, in which case the public sympathy for us and for this cause gets pushed way up. If we do get arrested, then of course that is another victory for us. And if they, on the unlikely chance that they shut down the gun store, that's also a victory. Well, that's what they did. We went up there and the door was locked. So it was like, I was getting ready to tell my students, because it was like 3 days before classes started, I was getting ready to let them know that I had been arrested. Well, instead we got to talk about wow, this nonviolent stuff is pretty powerful, right? We shut down a gun store. No AR-15s or any other gun were sold on that day to anybody who might have been having an episode, because we hear increasingly in the reportage on gun violence, the journalists now, the reporters, are making sure, unlike in the past, they make sure to mention this gun was bought legally. That's new in the sort of journalistic narrative. You go back and look at stories in the US from years ago, and that wasn't an issue, but gun control advocates have made it an issue. And so that's one of the first things that's mentioned. And that becomes a very powerful argument. So anyway, that I just see our lives as a sort of an ongoing mission to promote nonviolence, and yes, to live lives that show that we're not being hypocritical about it, that we are involved in constructive program. So my mentors include people, primarily Indigenous people, who do that. One of my mentors, even though she doesn't know it, is Winona LaDuke. And if anybody's seen her documentary, First Daughter of the Black Snake, that's exactly what ever since I saw that film, I've been calling her the Indigenous American Gandhi, because there's a scene in that film, which the film is primarily about the constructive program that is going on White Earth Reservation, her home reservation. And they're trying, new strains of indigenous corn. They're preserving the seed stock. They're doing alternative energy. But then it shows them mounting up, getting on horseback. And she said, every once in a while, unfortunately, we got to go out and resist. And she, in that particular case, was talking about a pipeline. So that kind of model, I think, is something, I'm glad you're exploring that all over the world, Stellan. And I think that it is the model to put forth. And we can, and also to put forth, I put it forth to my students as we can do this as individuals and as collectives. And we're told all the time that it's an either or. It doesn't matter what you do as an individual because the US military is the biggest consumer of fossil fuel. Well, actually, it does matter what we do as individuals. I gave my car away 17 years ago to a hospice nurse who needed it more than I did. And since then, all that gasoline that I don't burn because for about 10 years, I just did it on a bicycle until I was wounded in my left hand, and I don't have any strength in that arm, and I was scared to, kind of go jacking around urban traffic in my bicycle anymore. So I just take mass transit, and the idea that you can add up the cumulative effects of this over a long period of years helps you realize that as an individual, actually our little efforts do make a difference. And I try to help students think of themselves as having agency every day. Start now, and it adds up, and be involved with other people to make that, be a model yourself, so that you can tell people, like I tell my students, I do not use bags from stores. I carry one with me. Well, that's a tiny little action, but I wonder, having done it for the past 36 or 37 years, and using maybe one bag because I had to buy something for somebody else and I wasn't planning on buying anything, maybe one per year, and I am not exaggerating. So that means what kind of volume of plastic and paper are involved in doing this for decades. So your individual efforts to engage in constructive program do add up. And this kind of like acceptance of this as a life and a lifestyle, it doesn't even mean that you have to be a pacifist. It just means that you see what's being effective, and so you do that. So that to me is, Pietro, I do have to say hello from Patrick Hiller. Dr. Hiller was so excited that you're going to be on today, and he said, I'm going to try to join by phone. He may be joining by phone, but he's driving. So, he admires your work so much. And I enjoyed meeting you at the Kroc Institute for a minute when he introduced us. So this to me is it's a mission for all of us, not just a career. And I mean, we're in one of the very few fields where a lot of us came into activism first and the academy second. I think I'm probably one of the very few professors at my university, which is a big public university, who I didn't get my degrees until later in life. And it actually gives me the chance to tell students who say things like, well, I'm done raising my children. I'm in my late 40s. Is it too late for me to get a degree? And I tell them, you're ahead of where I was. Go for it. And I've been told repeatedly by non-traditional students who hear me say that it gives them a new spark, that we just go on and on. The secret is persistence. Abby Hoffman was asked by a reporter, how is it that you won so many struggles? And he said, it wasn't just because I was a good organizer. I was an okay organizer, but mostly I was the last one who kept showing up. And I think that's one of the things this group does. And that's one of the things that I think by modeling that to young people and reassuring them that your agency never goes away and it's really important, then I think we give them a gift that is basically letting them know there's a lot of power on the table. It's not power over others if you take it and use it wisely, but if you leave it on the table, somebody else will take it and use it unwisely as power over others. And to introduce to them the idea that there is much more power available to us than we routinely see. So like as Stellan was talking about, seeking autonomy is something you can do with you can have, like the Zapatistas did, you can have a parallel institution, a parallel government. That's certainly what was, that was part of the film on Denmark, right? Where the shipyard workers said, our underground movement, they were the authorities. They were the ones we were listening to, and they were the ones who were telling us what to do, and we did it.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you.
So I'd like to invite everyone back into the conversation, and just picking up on something Tom just shared, Michael. The way I hold nonviolence is that it's a philosophy, it's a way of life, and I'll just turn it over to you, Michael, to share your thoughts on what Pietro, Stellan, and Tom just shared.
Yes, thank you so much, Tom. They have certainly shared a great deal. It's like an overview, glimpses of the incredible work that's going on around the world by courageous people who often, as in the case of Metta, are paying the ultimate price. And it doesn't take less than that to shift the world to a nonviolent basis. Tom, you didn't mention the rescue of the Jews when the German attaché Georg Duckwitz tipped off the Danish underground that all the Danish Jews were going to be arrested the next day. He got them on fishing boats, whatever they could commandeer, and got them across the strait to Sweden. That was a dramatic and exemplary episode. Stellan, I'm so glad you mentioned the MST. It is a model of constructive program with mostly a little bit of resistance, whereas many of the things we see today are primarily resistance and maybe a smidge of constructive programs. So we need to really balance them together. And Pietro, I've been hearing your reports for many years about what's going on in our southern neighbor. And boy, it's a challenge. But I think it's a challenge to all of us, not just the people of Mexico, not just the people of Central America. We've got to change the whole framework, the whole culture, so that people do not see one another as something to exploit, something to injure, something to get something from. But I would put it this way, something into whom our consciousness can joyfully expand. So I think I will leave it at that and ask, Tom, maybe ask any of the three of them if they have final comments. And we don't have much time for audience members, but there might be something there we can respond to.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Stellan, Pietro, any final comments from either of you?
Yeah, I would like to point out that I think the example that you, Pietro, mentioned was really important in the way that when we see that the court system and the state fails, but also maybe existing collusion with the army and people that conduct these disappearances from the criminal gangs or so, it's vital that we create the alternatives, autonomous civil society alternatives that are doing what exactly you are involved in. So I think that is maybe a thread here, to not just protest, but actually create the nonviolent alternatives.
Yes. Can I say something little?
Please.
Yes. It has been excellent to listen to Stellan and Tom, because I think we can identify many things. And also Michael and you, Tom, this synthesis. The disappear struggle is complex in the sense of alternatives, because social alternatives, not the peasant and indigenous autonomy struggle we have. They have this constructive alternative that you tell very well in the constructive resistance. It's a very important subject. The disappeared people want to find a little bit of life again in the immediate situation. So, and they are from a social ideology and class that it's not of social change. They are very conservatives, most of them, traditional. So it's complex. But I would like to say a little thing that is very useful for us in the process, academic, as Tom said, and also with building social activists. That are the two things we do in many things, and we try ourselves to think that. Relatives of disappeared people, the first big change in their identity is to find they have power. That's a very, very key thing in life, and it was what we try to do with students and many people. That's the first big rupture we build. Well, the first is that we reproduce violence in many things that we don't know. That's the key thing for starting to break something in your identity. We use in university and in other things. But the second important is to discover, as Gandhi, Zapatis, and many could say, that you have power, not only the authority, but you. That's very difficult, but this is the experience their action builds in them. But the second big rupture is more difficult in everyone, is that we know, we understood in decades that you can have power, but you decide not to use it. And that's a very, very deep key in nonviolence, because you can be awareness of power, but you decide for many reasons, a convenience, fear, job, family, security, many money, many reasons, you decide not to confront authority or the adversary or the other. So these are two important processes that are not the same, absolutely, and of what we try to learn from the pedagogy of social nonviolence struggle from relatives, how they decided to use power. It's a big challenge for all of us.
Yeah, thank you, Pietro. Jim, welcome back.
Did Tom want to say something?
Tom, did you have anything else you'd like to share?
Well, bolt the doors, just a few more hours. No, I'm good, thanks.
Well, thank you, Pietro and Stellan and Tom, for this very deep conversation. I must say, Pietro, the work that you're doing with people who have disappeared, you know, from the studies that have been done, is in many ways harder than the work with people who have been killed in an observable, visible way. The fact that the family doesn't know what happens. They think the person may be dead, but they actually don't know, is in many ways the hardest burden of all to bear. And to go out into the fields, as you were recounting, and to start to dig up and not know whether it's going to be the bones of your own child or somebody else's and what conditions they must be in. The psychological trauma that these families endure is at a scale that is hard to take in. So I just want to acknowledge the work that you're doing and the extraordinary courage and heroism that you and these families that find their power. And then what? You know, then what is a remarkable testament to the human spirit. So I just want to acknowledge that because you brought in something, I think, very deep with us today. And the other comment that I would make just quickly, I was just struck, Stellan, by your observation, which I didn't know, that over the decades, reclaimed land is now the size of Cuba. So, I mean, the revolutionary fervor of Che and Fidel lives on in different ways, and whether it's the Zapatistas or even the people in Spain, the whole regions of in northern Spain that have been reclaimed by local people in an autonomous way. And I wanted to note that, because in many ways that's what Humanity Rising is. We've claimed a certain autonomy, and we're not blaming anybody, we're not criticizing anybody, we're just doing what we're doing in a way that is empowering people in the spirit of Buckminster Fuller, that we need to create the future, and the fact that it's happening, with landlords that are perfectly capable of all kinds of coercive force, and yet huge tracts of land have been liberated and are now operating autonomously, as they are doing in Chiapas, for example, is an extraordinarily powerful, positive example of nonviolence. And that, touches on some of the points that you were making, Tom, as well. So I'm finding I've learned a lot about it, but I'm just deeply, deeply empathic, Pietro, to what you're doing and what your families there have been suffering. And when you take in, it's happened to tens of thousands of people. It's an extraordinary statement of both our challenges, but what we human beings are capable of if we're properly inspired and properly equipped to do what needs to be done. So those would be my quick comments. Tom, do you want to make a couple of your own? Maybe, Michael, you have a final comment, then Tom, why don't you tee us up for tomorrow?
You know me so well, Jim. I have not one but two final comments. One of them is apropos of the MST in Brazil, that there is a wonderful film. It's an old film now, or maybe it's been replaced by something better, but it was called Raiz Forte, Strong Roots. And it's an extremely good documentary about that movement. The other thing I wanted to say is that, in a little bit more abstract, I guess, that to cause a human being to disappear is, in some deep sense, worse than death.
Mm. Mm.
And
yeah.
So to recover these people is an instinctive effort of elevating humanity, which a famous program mounted by Ubiquity University is all about.
Mm.
And I just want to thank the three of you again for, very thought-provoking and inspiring presentations.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Not just for your comments, but for making all of this 2 weeks happen. So much gratitude and appreciation, and thanks to the three of you for joining us today and all that you've shared with us today, but the work you've been doing for a very long time. And it's such an honor to have you with us today. Tomorrow we're gonna continue this conversation about how do we move nonviolence off the theoretical drawing board and bring it into the arenas of struggle and cooperation. And so we'll be sharing more with our panelists tomorrow, some of the active nonviolence campaigns that are happening around the world, what's been learned from them, and just to help our audience understand the extraordinary work that is happening to bring nonviolence to life and make a significant impact in the world.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. There's always grounds for hope And that's what you are bringing forth this week, and it's a very inspiring. So that brings us to a close for our session today, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat that Stan has just put in, and we'll see everyone tomorrow, same time, same station for day number 8 of our 10-day program on nonviolence in our time. Thank you all so much.